unifiedly taken into a single whole. If that could be taken as an indicator of Wittgenstein's uh, unique proposal about the relation between language and reality via the proposition, then I think that must have been a remarkable advancement in his own time. And it is good that Daniel has reminded of this, the complexity of the relation between, complexity of the relation between Russell and Wittgenstein, and also the complex relations between a proposition and adjustment. So I think Daniel has done a very good job in giving us very powerful insights. Now let us invite other speakers to join the discussion. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Yes, sir.
I agree with everything you said.
Thank you, sir. Now the talk is open for discussion. So you may please ask some questions to the speaker.
May I?
Sir.
Yeah. I must thank Daniel for such nice presentation, and also the way Professor Pradhan has summarized the speech given by Daniel. Now, one thing that is bothering me is this, that when Daniel said that picture theory is a theory of representation and not of judgment. Now here, if we accept this thing, and because it is a theory of representation, as he says, because it's not a dual theory. Now it reminds us the image theory as advocated by Locke. So if that be the case, then we may accept it. But he also says that it is not of, it is a theory of representation and not of judgment. Now the thing is, the same Wittgenstein, when after some time he is entering into the domain of from picture theory to use theory of language, then obviously the judgmental aspect of the proposition is coming to the fore. So this is what is bothering me, and if I'm right, you can just give your vision on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I think you're right. You should be bothered by that because that is fundamentally incorrect. What I said is, what I meant to say was not the picture theory is not a theory of judgment, but a theory of representation. But rather, the picture theory is not primarily a theory of judgment, but is primarily a theory of representation. That does not mean that it's not a theory of judgment. It means that any theory of judgment for Wittgenstein needs to build on a theory of representation. What is basic, what needs to be done first is to understand how sense comes about, how a proposition acquires sense, and therefore the possibilities of being true and false. That is what a theory of representation does. So there's a passage in the Notes on Logic where Wittgenstein says, judgment, command, questions are all on the same level. What interests us is only the unasserted proposition. So what he does basically is identifying a core element that needs to be clarified. And when that element is clarified, then judgment, command, questions, any sort of propositional attitude would then be clarified as well. So in that sense, the picture theory is not a theory of judgment. For Russell, Russell was interested in judgment primarily because he thought that judgment complexes are what are true or false. Russell never shared that sort of a linguistic term that Frege and Wittgenstein sort of adopted earlier on by focusing on a theory of, in the case of Frege, a theory of thought, which is a theory of representation anyway, and Wittgenstein, a theory of language. Yeah. So in that sense, I think the picture theory is primarily a theory of sense or a theory of representation. But that's not to deny that is a theory of judgment, because it's also a theory of judgment. By representing things as they are or as they are not, I'm already making a judgment in saying things are this way and that way. I'm already committing myself to some ways the world is or is not, and in so doing, I am making a judgment. So the theory. So to sum up, what I wanted to say is that the picture theory is not primarily a theory of judgment, because it means to be a theory of sense, of truth and falsity first, but is also a theory of judgment, right? Or derivatively, if you like, is also a theory of judgment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Professor Inakshi Maitra.
Thanks, Professor Panda, and thanks, Professor Mitz, for this very clear lecture, and also Professor Pradhan for his very illuminating commentary. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, madam.
Yes. My question relates to the previous way the conversation was going on. That may I say that what motivated the commentators like Solomon Potter, etc., to say that the picture theory is a multiple relation theory of judgment is perhaps Wittgenstein said that when we say a judgment proposition or a belief proposition that A judges that P, though Wittgenstein preferred to use the word belief and not judgment, there's a belief, but suppose take that A judges that P means P says P, and P says P is ultimately the picture theory. So this might have, I'm just thinking that perhaps this might have been a motivating factor for the recent Wittgenstein scholars, as Professor Metz pointed out. They were interpreting the picture theory in this way. And secondly, what also disturbs me, what in a different way disturbs me, is this, that since the P says P is a non-statable proposition, it's ineffable, because it's nonsense. How sense is made possible, how picture does the job, is not sayable in the Tractarian framework. So, but multiple relation that somebody judges that P, no theory of shownness or unsayability was present in Russell's scheme. So, given this fact, why were the commentators actually went on? So, this is my second puzzle. And thirdly, for my own clarification, I would like to say that would you agree that if I don't know whether I'm right in reading Tractatus in this way, that would Wittgenstein say that all the belief propositions are actually unsayable because all the belief propositions actually say P says P? So these are my three questions.
Okay, there's a lot going on there. So I guess the motivation for seeing the picture theory as something along those lines rather than those lines are exactly as you say, because of what Wittgenstein, the way in which Wittgenstein presents the picture theory. He never presents a picture theory, or almost never. There are a couple of passages in the Tractatus and the notebooks entries where he speaks of a representing picture and a represented reality, or a representing fact and a represented fact. That seems to suggest that sort of interpretation. But most of the time, it goes for a model like that, which is clearly not dual, not simply dual. It's not like we have a proposition and we have reality, and we have a simple relation of picturing. Yeah. Instead, the relation of picturing is a general relation that obtains when several dual relations of going proxy for obtain. Yeah. Bearing in mind that because of Wittgenstein's adoption of the context principle, these two things are not independent of one another. You cannot have these simple relations and then not have the whole relation of picturing. Or you cannot have the whole relation of picturing without these relations, because only in the context of a propositions do names do that. Yeah. So the obtaining of those relations, is basically indistinguishable from the whole thing representing reality. Yeah. So I guess the motivation for saying that the picture theory is a multiple relation theory comes from observing that Wittgenstein rarely goes for that simple model, right? Um, yeah. So I guess that's part of the motivation. I don't think, as I try to show, I mean, I understand that, and I think I can account for that in my interpretation without having to commit myself to the view that the picture theory is a multiple relation theory. About yeah. So about the questions about the ineffability of the picture theory itself. The picture theory cannot be stated according to itself, right? What the exposition of the picture theory is trying to do is to say something that can only be shown. That clearly is a problem for Wittgenstein. He tried to account for it by the saying showing distinction, by declaring his own propositions nonsensical. As I'm sure you are familiar with, there are many different interpretations of the function of nonsense in the Tractatus. There are people who, traditional interpreters, who sort of claim that the Tractatus itself is a sort of attempt to convey ineffable thoughts, ineffable insights. People like Peter Hacker, Brian McGuinness, David Pears, have tried to defend the theory on those grounds, right? The theory is by its own lights nonsensical, but it somehow manages to convey something that cannot, strictly speaking, be put into words. More recently, there are, again, I'm sure you're familiar with the more recent, which are not too recent anymore, the so-called therapeutic or resolute readings of the Tractatus, developed by people like James Conant, Cora Diamond, and others, Philip Kramer, and so on and so forth, who claim that will be chickening out, right? It will be chickening out to just try to say or try to cling to the idea that the Tractatus is trying to convey ineffable thoughts, whereas the Tractatus is trying to engage in a therapeutic, anti-metaphysical kind of enterprise. But then involves getting rid of, the content of the picture theory altogether, right? It would just to sort of claim that what the picture theory itself tries to say is nonsensical, and we need to take that seriously. So we just need to, throw the latter away at the end of the Tractatus and realize that everything that was going on before was nonsense, and all the metaphysical or linguistic pictures that were provided were nonsense. So we regain some sort of a authentic relation with the world, and we're not bothered anymore by metaphysical commitments or metaphysical construals. So I don't know. I wrote a bit like years ago about the Tractatus view of nonsense. I myself more of a traditionalist and not like not a resolute interpreter, if you like. So I think there's something to be said about picture theory. Nonsense is a consequence of the theory of sense that is presented there. Whether nonsense amounts to something that cannot be thought, probably not.
Okay, thanks, Professor Health.
Thank you, madam. Any other question? Jhadeshwar Ghosh, Professor Jhadeshwar Ghosh would like to ask some question. Smita is also there. Yeah. Any other question now?
Ranjan, can I just
Sir.
come back to the question which Professor Rai has raised?
Sure, sir.
Whether all belief propositions are unspeakable, ineffable. Taking the clue from Wittgenstein's own statement, A believes that P or A judges that P is the same as P says that P. Now, possibly the question could have been for Wittgenstein like this, that if he brings beliefs into the nexus of a proposition, then perhaps he will go back to Russell's way of understanding judgment. That's why he is keeping the judgments, the idea of a belief and judgment out for the sake of logic. And the logic of a proposition speaks for itself, as he says. Logic speaks for itself. So, in that propositions also speak. A proposition speaks for itself. So, in that sense, P says that P perhaps could be construed. But from this, the idea of ineffability of beliefs doesn't arise. Rather, the eliminability of belief arises. He has eliminated the belief from the structure of the proposition. So it is not a question of ineffability. It is a question of eliminability. That is what he is trying to do, because he is all the time taking the logical route to the structure of a proposition. He is not taking any judgmental or psychological route to the proposition. So I think that will be one way of understanding why Wittgenstein says P says that P is the right way of understanding, and that fits into his picture theory framework, which is exactly a logical theory of propositions framework. For him, a logical theory of proposition is also a logical theory of depiction or representation, and it also amounts to a logical theory of the structure of the universe. So a theory of proposition is doing a dual job of making propositions part of language, and also making them the via media through which we can really approach the universe.
Sir, thank you very much. Yes. One question that comes, I mean, it's not a question but a clarification about the nature of representation, because this representation is not entirely guided by I mean, representation is basically linguistic representation, as we are talking about how propositions as a logical linguistic entity involves sense, and that takes care of picturing the world or representing the world. So but at the same time, what happens to the idea of mental representation, or are they, I mean, is it totally divorced from the idea of mental representation? So that
well, not entirely, I don't think, because the Tractatus still retains the notion of thought. Yeah, a Gedanke is a thought, right? In a famous letter to Russell, written in 1919, he made clear that if we take a level of language, there's a further level, right, which is the level of thought. And to the words of language correspond elements of the thought. Yeah? And he said, what those are, I have no idea. I don't know. Those are psychic elements that I know nothing about. But there has to be something like that for, to maintain some sort of a, role for intentionality, I suppose. The things in the Tractatus are complicated by the fact that the judging subject is just not present, is just not recognized as a legitimate entity. So what you have is thoughts, thoughts that do not seem to have a bearer. But you do have thoughts because a picture is precisely a fact in its representative relation to the world. It's a picture is a propositional sign thought out, applied and thought out. So you have that sort of a triad, if you like. So there is still a role that the picture theory retains for something like a dimension of thought or thinking. But the Tractatus doesn't say anything about how that thinking is then implemented by thinking subjects, or not really doesn't say anything. It says that there's no such thing as the thinking subject, which is not a position that has been, taken up by many of the subsequent philosophers. Seems to be a transcendentalist, idealist position that has gone out of favor. But there is still a role. Although I agree with the comments made earlier that the Tractatus rejects any sort of role for psychology and thinks that psychology is just one of the empirical sciences and it's not closer to logic or philosophy than any of the other sciences. But it does give an account of language and of thought as well, just like Frege did. Frege was possibly the most anti-psychologistic philosopher ever, but he still was interested in thinking and the thought. The first logical investigation that he wrote was titled The Gedanke, the thought. So he was interested in a nice non-psychological way of approaching thinking and the relation between thought and reality, which persists in the Tractatus. Although the Tractatus, unlike the later Wittgenstein that got interested not just in this abstract model of thought, which retains thoughts but loses the thinking subjects. Later on, Wittgenstein got interested in a sort of a more less abstract but applied model of thinking, where judging thinking subjects are just part of, and they're not just gotten rid of.
Thank you. Yes, I think that era was an era which was against psychologism. Even in the writings of Husserl, there's kind of an anti-psychologism, and Frege, and of course Wittgenstein.
Definitely, the Tractatus is within that tradition. And I think the interesting thing is that Wittgenstein develops an approach to language that rejects these sort of abstract views of thinking and representation of the Tractatus, and puts the human beings at the center of language games and interactions without going back to a psychologistic position. Because what matters then is language games and practices, which are not psychological entities at all. They are living things. They are practices, conventions, things that exist outside of the mind, but are concrete, real, not like the model of the Tractatus that doesn't well, doesn't even mention real propositions, really. When we talk about language in the Tractatus, we're not talking about the language we normally use. We talk about an abstraction. We talk about something that Wittgenstein thought would be what logical analysis would ultimately reveal, right? So it's something that, it doesn't give an examples of elementary propositions. It doesn't give an example of names. So the language that he talks about and he, make the subject matter of his work is something that is fairly remote from what we normally use. Whereas in his later career, he got back to exactly what we normally use without necessarily becoming psychologistic. I don't think the later Wittgenstein is a psychologistic philosopher at all.
Yeah. Any other question, or KB, you have any question? Vikrant? Gautam?
No, sir.
Jadesarda, you have any question? So then we
no, Professor Ponda, no question. Just
okay. So then I think we can close the meeting today. So thank you very much, Dr. Daniel Mezzadri, for your wonderful talk, and thank you for accepting our invitation and associating yourself with this forum for philosophy. On behalf of the forum, I thank you for this. I also thank Professor Pradhan for his presence and valuable comments on this lecture series. He has been, continuously helping us, in a sense, elucidating many complex ideas of Wittgenstein's thought, and so his presence is really praiseworthy, and I thank you, sir, for this. And
thank you. I'm very sorry that I joined a bit late today.
No, sir, it was okay.
Yeah.
It was okay.
Thank you.
And I thank all the participants who joined today. Professor Inakshi Maitra joined today for the first time. She was from Delhi University. She is from Delhi University. She will be giving a talk in the coming, maybe in the month of July. So, and Professor Ranjit Ghosh also with us. I thank you all the participants for spending your valuable time with this event. Thank you so much. Thank you. We will have another lecture in the month of June, possibly on 18th June. So I will update you on email about when I get some message from the speaker. So on 18th June we'll meet. We have also a plan to organize another book discussion event in the month of July on Wittgenstein and Tagore. Professor Priyambada Sarkar's book has come out from Oxford University Press. So these are the two events which are coming up next to this. So I hope you all will join. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Can I just, I just wanted to thank Professor Panda and everybody for, first of all, for the invitation and for your attention and for your questions, which were really good and sort of made me think about, ways in which I possibly have to, revise the paper. We'll revise the paper, bearing in mind some of the very good points that you made. So thank you very much for your feedback, which I will definitely use to improve the paper as revisions will come along.
Thank you. Yes, we were planned to publish this volume, so definitely it will be useful. Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Great, and hope to stay in touch.
Yes, yes, sure, sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.